Hi, you're listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, the podcast where two Midwestern moms talk progressive politics and political activism with authors, candidates, artists, activists, and more. With us today is Joe Schiavoni. He is an Ohio State Senator from the 33rd District, and he is also a candidate for governor in Ohio. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you for the opportunity to come on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get involved in politics?
Sure. I grew up in the Mahoning Valley in the Youngstown area, and I grew up in worked jobs that most people work in Northeast Ohio. I worked in landscaping crews and construction crews, a local butcher shop. I fought in the Golden Gloves in Youngstown. My last fight was actually in the Struthers Fieldhouse. I know that's where you're from. And so I went away to OU and I went to Capitol Law School. I came back. I started working as a workers' comp attorney in Youngstown with my father, became active in the Big Brothers and Big Sisters. And then when I was 29, I got appointed to the state Senate to fill a vacancy because John Bocherry, the sitting senator then, ran for Congress and left his seat. And so at that point, I just went down there. I didn't have any political experience, but I knew that the Valley needed somebody that was going to go down there and get to work and try to help people through situations and not be one of these politicians that's out for themselves, but is out for the people that they're supposed to represent. And so that was 9 years ago, and worked through a lot of battles in the Senate. And last year decided that we were going to put a team together to run for governor, and we have a week and a half left.
Excellent. And your primary is on May 8th, is that correct?
Correct.
And it's a pretty full field on the Democratic side this year.
It is. If you look back at the way that this unfolded, last year, the mayor of Dayton, a former congresswoman from Barberton, and a former state representative from Cincinnati, all three women were running for governor. And then Richard Cordray decided he was going to run for governor late 2017, and then all three of those candidates joined his team. Then Dennis Kucinich jumped in, then Bill O'Neill jumped in. And so I've been basically running against two different fields for the last year and a half. But now it's me, Rich Cordray, Dennis Kucinich, and Bill O'Neill running for this next Tuesday. And so it is a crowded field. On the Republican side, there's two candidates, Mary Taylor and Mike DeWine. And so there's a lot of choices for Ohioans this year for governor.
So there are a lot of big issues facing Ohioans right now. Certainly things like redistricting with issue 1 coming up on the ballot, things like the opioid crisis. There's a lot going on with education. What are the issues that are really driving your campaign?
These issues that you brought up are important to everybody in the state. I've tried to keep focus on things that matter to everyday Ohioans. People need opportunities. They need opportunities to make a livable wage. They want opportunities for their kids in school, starting all the way at pre-K. They want to deal with this drug problem that has ripped apart our state. They want to deal with crime. They want to feel safe in their communities. We have to make sure that we're focusing on all of these things at the same time. So it's about cleaning up the state. I've put a lot of bills forward talking about cleaning up underground infrastructure for clean water systems in the state, talking about cleaning up industrial brownfields, talking about investing in our roads and bridges so that people have a good infrastructure in this state. And when you do that, you give your people skills at the same time. You're talking about universal pre-K for kids, making sure that public schools are funded properly, dealing with student debt for graduates, and just trying to do all of this at the same time. The Republican legislature that I've worked with for the past 10 years has made tax cuts the priority rather than investing in the people. And that's why you see this crumbling infrastructure. That's why you see young people leaving Ohio. It's because they don't have the opportunities, because the General Assembly has given all the wealth to those highest earners rather than reinvesting it in our people.
I was really interested to see and very grateful to see that on your website you address an issue that maybe isn't specific to Ohio, but is very sort of important in Ohio, and I don't think a lot of people think about, which is payday loan reform. I know that Ohio has a really high rate of people getting fleeced by payday lenders.
I believe that they had the highest payday loan prices in the nation in 2016. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your ideas for payday loan reform.
Yeah, it's a ripoff. And you see this happening in a lot of communities that are struggling. You'll see these car title places pop up where, they'll take your car title to give you a few $100 and then they make you pay 5-6 times that money back. And when you don't pay it back, they take your car. And you see those things. That's ridiculous. You shouldn't be paying 800% interest on a loan, and then it screws up your credit and follows you around and gives you such a hurdle that you can't overcome. So it's about reining in these places, right? We can use our banks. We can use our credit unions. We can still have some lending companies coming in, but we have to cap that interest and we have to protect our people. Some people will say, well, people go in there willingly. Well, they only go in there when it's their last opportunity to get a buck, when they desperately need it in order to save something that they're about to lose. And so we can't be gouging the most vulnerable people. So there's a bill that just passed the House and will be moving on to the Senate, and I'll be supporting that and be pushing in order to make that happen.
Wonderful.
So obviously, gun safety is a big issue right now, and it's something we talk a lot about on this podcast. Can you talk a little bit about what your stance is on guns and gun safety and what you would want to do as governor?
Yeah, I proposed a piece of legislation a couple of weeks back talking about red flag bills. And so it's very simple. It says that if a family or a law enforcement feels that somebody is in danger to themselves or to others, that they can petition the court and ask that the court grant an order so that the police can go in and temporarily seize firearms for 14 days until we can actually have a hearing and sort it out. I think that's a good first step. I've also proposed a piece of legislation that would close the gun show loophole. There's no reason that people should be going to gun shows and buying guns without going through a background check. Those seem to be two pieces of legislation that we're really trying to push Democrats and Republicans to get behind. I've also talked about assault weapon ban, and I've said that if I was the governor in the state of Ohio, I would sign a bill to ban certain firearms, because I do not think that civilians need access to all of these military-grade firearms. And so those are the platform pieces that I've been running, but it's really about making sure that people feel safe. I never had to feel like I was going to get killed or shot or attacked in school. I've never had that feeling, but I know a lot of younger people do, and that is scary for me. I mean, I have 2 little kids, and I worry about that. And so I think we need to invest more resources into our individual school districts so that the schools can make a decision on how they want to keep their kids safe, whether it's getting behavioral specialists in the hall, mental health experts dealing with kids' problems, so that we can nip these things at the bud. I've been sitting with high school kids and college kids and having roundtable discussions for the past year about this and really trying to bring their voices to the State House. I think that that's really important. It's an engaging issue for young people, and most young people hate politics because they feel disconnected. But on this one, they're very connected. They're very enthusiastic. But I tell them that just making your voice heard now doesn't mean anything if you don't actually go vote, because politicians look at who votes and then they look at that number and determine whether or not they're going to really listen to you. And I hear that all the time in Columbus.
And I noticed that Moms Demand Action named you one of their gun sense candidates.
Yeah, I've been to tons of their meetings, and I feel really connected to that group. It's young mothers. Like I said, I have a 3 and a 5-year-old, so we relate to each other very well. All they want is safety. They want safety when their kids are going over their friend's house. They want safety when they're sending their kids to school. They want to feel safe, and they want their kids to not have this feeling that so many young people have. And they're very sensible about their approach with politicians and with elected officials. And I've helped them dictate their language for bills. I've helped them work through the hallways of the State House in order to reach members of the House and the Senate. And so we make a good team.
So one thing that has been really important to Ohio voters of both parties, especially people that I know in Ohio, is the opioid crisis. And I know that Ohio has some of the strictest prescribing regulations at this point for opioids, but there hasn't been a lot done for mental health and addiction services for people who are already addicted to opioids. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your plans for fighting the opioid crisis if elected.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. I mean, we've done some law changes that would limit the upstream problems so that we don't have all of these opioids, we don't have all these pills in people's medicine cabinets, but that doesn't help the thousands and thousands of families that are dealing with this horrible addiction. And a lot of these people that are dealing with addiction, they didn't just wake up one day and decide to shoot heroin and try to, kill themselves with fentanyl. This stuff is so powerful. They started with the prescription that the doctor gave them, whether it was a work-related injury, whether it was a sports-related injury, and things have gone downhill. My running mate, Stephanie Dodd's sister, died of an overdose, and she started the prescription with the doctor's order as a high school athlete when she tore her knee. So, I have a lot of conversations with people across the state about, some people are very cold and callous about this. And I say, look, you change your tune real quick if this is your son or your daughter or somebody that you love. And then when it happens to them, they do. So I've proposed legislation that would allocate a portion of Ohio's rainy day fund to invest in mental health, to invest in addiction services, to invest in jobs and family services, to invest in additional beds, and then reconnecting families after the addiction, after you go through treatment, because this is a tough, rocky road, and you need a lot of safety nets there to help people. Some people don't want to spend the money. Some taxpayers say it's not worth it to them, but they're going to pay one way or another, whether they're going to lock people up, they're going to give people second chances through services, or they're going to deal with crime when they're, desperate for money and they're robbing them in their neighborhood. So it's something that we must deal with. And I think that the current administration has really failed to deal with this.
Well, and I'm from Canton, from Stark County, and, I hear the horror stories there of just there isn't even enough room in the morgue for the bodies that are piling up from opioid overdoses. And so it really seems like something that people have to realize soon is an issue that needs to be dealt with in a real systematic, compassionate way.
Well, plus it's decimating our workforce. You'll have employers come in and saying they can't find skilled trained workers because they can't pass drug tests and they don't have the skills. So, we got to do something about it. Canton is a good example. Also out in Montgomery County, they had to actually rent refrigeration trucks for bodies. That's crazy to think about, but it's real.
So let's talk about education. Education's becoming increasingly an issue throughout the country. There are teacher strikes going on everywhere, and education seems to have particular nuances in Ohio. So as someone who no longer lives there, I don't really understand what this ECOT thing is, but I keep hearing it. So could you talk a little bit about what's going on in education in Ohio and what your plans would be?
So the floodgates have been opened in the past decade for for-profit charter schools, both the brick and mortar kind that you see in a lot of the urban communities, but also e-schools where you just have kids sitting in front of their computer screens in their living room. That was ECOT. ECOT was the electronic classroom of tomorrow. And ECOT, I proposed a bill a couple years back that asked them to turn over some certain documents, just kind of logs of what the students are doing during the day so that we can show that these taxpayer dollars are actually helping kids with a different kind of education. They wouldn't do that. In fact, they ended up filing a lawsuit against the state, and then they closed the doors this year because they did not want to turn over that information. It is a ripoff. These are taxpayer dollars, because understand that when a kid goes to the public school and then decides to go to a for-profit charter school, whether it's a brick and mortar style or electronic, those state dollars follow the kid out of the classroom and into that for-profit model. And so when people think they're paying their local taxes to the school district, some of it's going there, but a lot of it is going out the door. And that's because the Republican majority in the Ohio Senate and House has taken so much money from these guys that they've allowed them to run wild. Finally, they're getting reined in, but it's been a decade where they've made millions off our kids, and it's been very frustrating to watch. I've been proposing bills for the past 6 or 7 years on it, and finally we're getting some progress here. So as governor, I would make sure that we limit the for-profit charter school model. I don't mind nonprofit charter schools that provide something different when the goal is not to make money, it's still to educate kids. But when the goal is to make money, then the education goals are lost. And so you see a lot of fraud and abuse in these for-profit charter schools. It's pretty sick to watch.
And in fact, the East Central Ohio Education Association, didn't they recently name you as the 2018 Friend of Education?
Yeah, I've got a lot of good relationships with public school teachers across the state. It kind of started when Governor Kasich and some legislators in the state house tried to take away their collective bargaining rights, not just teachers, but police and fire as well. That was back in 2011, and I traveled the state pushing back on